This is a brief introduction to the Sox-o-matic program. Sox-o-matic is a utility for naming, converting, and compressing files. It's a graphical user interface that facilitates certain operations of the command line program Sox-exchange. So basically, Sox-o-matic gives us a set of buttons that we can use to interact with Sox-exchange without having to do command line coding. Using the Sox-o-matic program simplifies the process of compressing, converting files, and naming them in a standardized format. Currently, it is compatible with Windows and with Mac, although Linux support is not available at this time. To use Sox-o-matic, you actually need to install two programs. First, you need to download and install Sox from the SourceForge website. This link is on the website page that hosts the video. Second, you need to download and install Sox-o-matic, and again, this program is linked through the website page. Once you have both of these programs downloaded, you'll need to build a connection between them so that Sox-o-matic is able to use the commands that are present in the Sox program. This installation process is a little bit different for PC computers and for Macs. So if you're working on a PC, the first thing that you'll need to do is go and find the location where the Sox program was installed. Typically, this is in the Program Files folder on the C drive, and you'll look for Program Files x86, and typically there's a Sox folder. Once you go into the Sox folder, you'll be able to see sox.exe, which is the executable for the Sox program. What you'll need to do is make a copy of this executable and rename it with the name Sox-i. Then, when you open the Sox-o-matic program, you can use the Configure button and navigate to this location. So if you have open Sox-o-matic, at the right you'll see a Configure button, and when you click on it, you'll see a dialog box where you can hit Select and then navigate to the location of your Sox executable. If you're working on a Mac computer, the first thing that you might notice is that when you go to open the program from the installation icon, you get an error message that says that the developer cannot be verified. We're hoping that this will change in the future, but for now there's an easy way around it. If you see this error message, hold down the Command button on your Mac and click on the program icon, and then select Open from the menu. When you do so, you'll see a similar dialog box, but now you'll have the option to go ahead and open the program. Once you've done so, the next step is relatively simple. You'll open the Sox-o-matic program and click on the Configure button, and then select the location of the Sox executable. So in this case, you don't need to make a copy of the executable. You can just navigate to the Applications folder, find the Sox program, and select the Sox executable so that Sox-o-matic knows where to look for Sox. So once you have this connection built, there are a few basic features available in Sox-o-matic. The first thing that you'll need to think about is to specify an input folder. These are the files that you're going to rename or convert or compress. And this can be either a single folder or a folder tree. The second thing you'll specify is the output folder, which must be different than the input folder. This is where the process files will be deposited after they've been processed. The next step is to specify a convert from and convert to file types. There are several options available depending on the configuration of your machine, but typically the ones that we work with are converting from WAV files to FLAC. And FLAC is a lossless compression format, which results in files that are approximately half as large as the original without loss of original data. So there are other compression formats, such as MP3, that can make files even smaller, but this is a lossy compression, which means that some of the original data is thrown away in ways that can never be recovered. When you convert to FLAC, the file is smaller, but all of the original data are retained. The next option is the number of threads that will be used in the conversion or compression. And this is related to the number of cores on your computer and how many tasks it can complete at the same time. So if you're leaving the computer to sit, for example, overnight and just process files, then you can select a relatively high number of threads. But if you're going to continue to do other work while Sox-o-matic runs, then you'll want to select a lower number of threads so that there's still some processing power left for other tasks. The number of threads that you see available will vary depending on the capacity of your computer. The next option is FLAC compression, which refers to how much computation the computer does to compress the file. The higher compression value you choose, the more the file will be compressed and the smaller the outcome will be. But we typically find that a flat compression of 2 is a good choice because as you go higher than this, the computer spends a lot more time compressing files and doesn't get much additional benefit. So for example, in tests comparing a compression of 2 and a compression of 8, a compression of 8 took about 50% longer to process because the computer was doing lots of computation, but the output files were only 3 to 5% smaller. Sox-o-matic also offers options for changing the sample rate and the bit depth of files. So one important note here, if you're processing files that have multiple sample rates, you should do these in different runs of the program. So all input files should have the same sample rate and bit depth to avoid conversion errors. If you have data with multiple sampling rates or bit depths, that's great, but it's important to process these separately. So you would put them in separate folders, and then you could select the same output folder, for example. Sox-o-matic also has the ability to name files and to add additional names to raw files that come from the field. This can be a particularly valuable ability when you're dealing with files from lots of different recorders and lots of different sites. So there are two options for this. I'm first going to demonstrate the CCB project format for naming files. And this is a format that we use internally within the Center for Conservation Bioacoustics. Typically, we have a number of different projects and different sites, so we tend to choose file names that are relatively long and informative. There's also a custom option that I'll demonstrate afterwards, where you can choose separate file naming conventions. But walking you through an example of how we name files when they come from the field, Sox-o-matic has a hardwired naming convention that takes the original names, particularly from things like Swift files, and adds essential information about recording location and settings. The advantage of creating these extended file names is that the metadata is directly in the file name in addition to the file structure. So if later the structure of the folders changes, or you need to pull a specific file for use in analysis, all of this important metadata comes with it, and it decreases the number of S0001.wav files that are sitting around on your laptop in a way that you can't trace them back to what project they belong to. One of the options as part of renaming is to adjust the timestamp. For certain projects, particularly projects that cover large geographic areas and multiple time zones, it's valuable to bring all the different timestamps to UTC, or Greenwich Mean Time. For other projects that are more local, where all the recorders are on the same time zone, and it's important to know biologically important times, such as dawn and dusk, you may choose to process them on the local time. One thing that's particularly important to watch for is standard versus daylight savings time. So typically we work with files on standard time and don't follow the change to daylight savings time. So this is an example of the naming for one of our projects. We start with a project ID, which is a unique alphanumeric code for the project and corresponds to a metadata base that catalogs all of our projects. In this example, project 88260 is a recording project on Barro Colorado Island in Panama. And the deployment ID is a combination of letters and numbers that specify the geographic location of the project, as well as an incrementing deployment number. So for example, the site is Barro Colorado Island, BCI, and this is deployment 2. So we use 02, allowing for up to 99 deployments in the current naming scheme. The third dialog box is deployment site, and this is a code that identifies the location of the specific recorder. So in a given site you might have, or in a given location you might have many recorders, but each is in a separate site that can be referenced by GPS coordinates. And finally, we include a recorder ID. And again, this is an alphanumeric identifier for an individual recorder. And this can be particularly valuable either if your equipment changes through time. So for example, if you've been recording in the same site for many years but periodically replace individual pieces of hardware, or if you have a project where the equipment moves around from site to site, and this allows you to track which unit was deployed in which site. Just to show you what the output can look like. So for example, this is what the raw data look like going into Sox-o-matic, where it's organized by deployments and by dates, and then the file names currently have some of the information that I appended when I set up the recorders, but mostly date and time. And after being run through Sox-o-matic, they've gone from .wav files to .flac files, so they're now about half the size, and the name includes, separated by hyphens, these various pieces of metadata, including the project number, the deployment ID, the site, the equipment number, as well as the date and time, with the Z indicating that it's been brought to UTC time. An alternative to using the CCB naming convention is to develop your own. And so there's also a dialog box that allows you to affix a prefix or a suffix. So for example, if you wanted to add the name of the site and the recorder before all of your files, you're able to do that through Sox-o-matic as well. So these are some of the basic features of the program. And for additional information, there's an interactive website where we'll post some basics of setup as well as new updates to the program. Thank you.